Have you ever wondered why some projects seem to flow effortlessly while others feel like a constant uphill battle against shifting requirements? The secret often lies not in how hard the team works, but in whether the foundational rules of engagement actually fit the work being done. Welcome to our deep dive into selecting the development approach, where we bridge the gap between high-level strategy and day-to-day execution. First, we must acknowledge that selecting the development approach isn't a one-time administrative task. It is a strategic decision that dictates how you will manage risk and deliver value. Next, we look at the two primary pillars of this choice: decision factors and delivery cadence. Decision factors are the why, the variables like project size, stakeholder needs, and environmental stability that push you toward one method over another. Delivery cadence is the when, the timing of when your customer actually gets to use what you are building. This matters because a mismatch here is a primary cause of project failure. Imagine trying to build a bridge using a trial and error approach, or conversely, trying to build a cutting-edge AI app with a plan that is locked in stone 3 years in advance. Neither makes sense. Today, we will master the situational logic needed to diagnose your project's unique DNA and choose the optimal path forward. By the end of this session, you won't just know the definitions of predictive and adaptive, you will know exactly when to pull each lever. Now, let's look at why this is so vital for your professional certification journey. Why does the Project Management Institute place such a heavy emphasis on choosing a development approach? It is because, in the modern professional landscape, a project manager is no longer just a scheduler. You are a tailor. On the PMP exam, this topic is classified as a high-priority domain. This means you can expect a significant number of scenario-based questions that test your ability to think on your feet. Our journey here is threefold. First, you must learn to select correctly. This involves diagnosing the project context, everything from the technology being used to the local regulations, to choose a framework that actually supports the work. Next, we must analyze factors. We will master the specific variables found within the deliverables themselves, the broader project environment, and the overarching organization. Finally, we must apply the mindset. This is the most critical part for the exam, developing the situational logic required to solve complex problems. Keep in mind that the exam is designed to trip you up if you only memorize definitions. It focuses on the why behind your decisions. If you choose an adaptive approach, you must be able to justify why that choice was better than a predictive one in that specific context. For example, if a question mentions high uncertainty and rapidly changing market trends, the why for an adaptive approach is risk mitigation through frequent feedback. This logic-first mentality is what separates successful candidates from the rest. With that in mind, let's debunk a common project management myth. Is there one perfect way to run a project? Many junior managers search for a single, superior framework, the one-size-fits-all solution. But the reality is that such a thing doesn't exist. The optimal approach is always a result of a situational diagnosis. Think of it like a medical professional. You wouldn't prescribe the same medicine to every patient. You look at the symptoms and the patient's history first. To find our optimal approach, we look at 3 intersecting circles. First, the deliverables. We ask, what are we building? Is it a tangible physical structure or a piece of intangible software? The nature of the what dictates much of the how. Second, project context. Here, we ask, how are we building it? What are the constraints, the risks, and the technical challenges? Third, the organization. We ask, who are we building it within? A startup has a very different culture and risk tolerance than a century-old government agency. This matters because forcing an organization that values rigid hierarchy to use a decentralized, purely adaptive framework often leads to chaos. Conversely, applying a rigid, slow-moving predictive plan to a high-innovation tech project leads to obsolescence before the project even finishes. There is no universally superior framework, only the one that fits your specific context, risk profile, and delivery needs. Next, we'll look at the specific scales we use to measure these deliverables. Imagine you are standing in front of a giant mixing board with 3 sliders. These sliders determine whether your project leans toward a predictive or an adaptive bias. Understanding where your project sits on this certainty spectrum is the first step in your diagnosis. The first slider is requirements certainty. On the far left, under predictive bias, requirements are straightforward and well known. Think of a repetitive construction project where the blueprints are standard. On the far right, under adaptive bias, requirements are evolving and unknown. This is common in research and development, where you are discovering what the customer wants as you build it. The second slider is scope stability. Is the scope stable and locked in early? If so, you lean predictive. If the scope is dynamic and changing, perhaps because of shifting market trends, you lean adaptive. Finally, look at the ease of change. This is a big one for engineers. If making a change late in the project is costly and difficult, like moving a weight-bearing wall in a skyscraper, you must lean predictive. If changes are easy and cheap, like updating code in a cloud-based app, you have the luxury of leaning adaptive. When you analyze a scenario, ask yourself, where do these sliders sit? If all three are on the left, your path is clear. But if they are split, you might be looking at a hybrid approach. Now, certainty isn't the only thing that pulls us in one direction or another. We also have to consider risk and compliance. What happens when you have a project with high innovation but also strict safety requirements? You have two opposing forces pulling at your development approach. On one side, we have the pull toward adaptive. This is driven by high innovation, where complex new business models demand continuous discovery. In these environments, value is derived directly from frequent end-user feedback. By iterating, you tackle high uncertainty early, which is a powerful form of risk mitigation. If you don't know if a feature will work, you build a small version of it first to find out. On the other side, we have the pull toward predictive. This is often driven by external factors like safety requirements and regulations. If you are building a medical device or a nuclear power plant, you cannot iterate your way through safety. These projects require rigorous, significant upfront planning to ensure every possible failure point is accounted for before work begins. Strict oversight from regulators also usually requires heavy documentation and established, repeatable processes that are hallmarks of a predictive approach. This matters because as a project manager, you must balance these pulls. You might use an adaptive approach for the user interface of a medical app to get that frequent feedback, but keep the data handling backend under a strict predictive framework to meet regulatory compliance. This balancing act is the core of modern project management. Let's shift our focus now from the deliverables themselves to the execution environment. Beyond what we are building, we must look at the execution environment, the project-level factors that influence our approach. Let's break these down into 4 key categories: stakeholders, schedule, financing, and complexity. First, look at your stakeholders. If they are willing and able to provide continuous, heavy involvement throughout the process, you are perfectly set up for adaptive methods. However, if your stakeholders are only available for a kickoff and a final review, an adaptive approach will likely fail due to a lack of feedback. Next, consider schedule constraints. If you have a hard, fixed end date, like a project tied to a specific holiday or legal deadline, you often lean predictive to ensure the critical path is managed. But if there is a desperate need to realize some business value before the project is 100% complete, adaptive allows you to deliver early wins. Financing is also a major factor. In environments with high financing uncertainty, where the next round of funding depends on showing results, the iterative value delivery of adaptive approaches is a lifesaver. Finally, look at size and complexity. While high complexity usually demands the flexibility of an adaptive approach, heavy reliance on external interdependencies, like waiting on a third-party vendor to ship a physical part, may dictate a hybrid pacing. You might be agile internally, but have to use predictive milestones to sync with your external partners. These environment factors are the weather of your project. You must plan your journey accordingly. Now let's look at the who, the organization itself. You can have the most innovative project in the world, but if you try to run it in an organization that isn't built for it, you will face organizational rejection. We categorize this into structure and culture. A predictive fit is usually found in a traditional hierarchy with a fixed functional structure. Here, authority is clear and departments are siloed. The culture in these organizations focuses on managing, directing, and measuring progress against strict, pre-approved baselines. Success is defined by how well you followed the plan. This isn't bad. It is actually very efficient for repetitive, high-volume work where deviations are costly. An adaptive fit, on the other hand, thrives in network-oriented, decentralized structures. Authority is often pushed down to the people doing the work. The culture here embraces uncertainty as an opportunity for innovation. It relies on self-managed teams and flexible thinking. Success here is defined by value delivered and the ability to pivot when new information arrives. As a project manager, you must be honest about where your organization sits. If you try to implement a purely adaptive approach in a rigid command and control culture without any tailoring, you will likely spend more time fighting the system than building the product. Understanding this cultural DNA is essential for choosing a path that leads to success rather than friction. Next, we look at the logistics of the teams themselves. How your team is physically and structurally organized is a massive indicator of which approach will work. We can look at this through two archetypes, the Agile cell and the scaled matrix. The Agile cell is characterized by small, co-located teams, typically 3 to 9 members, who have high bandwidth, face-to-face communication. These teams are the engine of adaptive approaches. Because they are small and close together, they can make decisions in minutes that might take a larger organization weeks. They thrive on the strong collaboration that iterative work requires. Contrast this with the scaled matrix. This represents larger, often distributed networks of people across different time zones or departments. These teams must rely on established policies, mature processes, and formal communication to stay aligned. Because of the communication overhead involved in managing hundreds of people, these environments naturally lean toward hybrid or predictive models. It's simply harder to pivot a cruise ship than a jet ski. The key insight here is that your reporting structures and your ways of working must align with your delivery method. If you have a distributed team of 200 people, but try to run it like a small startup cell without any structure, you'll end up with total misalignment. Always check the logistics before you commit to a framework. Speaking of delivery, let's look at the different rhythms or cadences we can use. Now that we've discussed the how, let's talk about the when, the delivery cadence. This is the rhythm at which you provide value to the customer. There are 4 primary models you need to know for the PMP exam. First is single delivery. This is the traditional model where you produce all outcomes at the very end of the project. A classic example is a process re-engineering project. The new process doesn't exist until the old one is fully replaced at the end. Second is multiple deliveries. Here, you have sequential deliveries at different times. Think of pharmaceutical clinical trials. Phase 1 is a delivery, Phase 2 is another, and so on. Each phase provides a specific result before moving to the next. Third, we have periodic deliveries. This is very common in modern business. Think of internal software updates that happen on a fixed schedule, like every second Tuesday of the month. It's predictable and regular. Finally, we have continuous delivery. This is the gold standard for market responsiveness. You are incrementally delivering tested value on an ongoing basis, sometimes multiple times a day. The most important takeaway here is that your choice of cadence is driven entirely by when business value is needed. If the customer needs value now to survive in a competitive market, you can't use a single delivery model. You must find a way to deliver incrementally. However, regardless of the cadence you choose, some things in project management never change. A common mistake students make is thinking that if you go agile or adaptive, you stop doing things like planning or monitoring. This is a dangerous myth. There are 5 universal focus areas that exist in every project, regardless of the framework you use: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, and controlling, and closing. Think of these as the vital signs of a project. Whether you are building a doghouse or a space station, you still have to start it, initiating, figure out how to do it, planning, actually do the work, executing, make sure it's going well, monitoring and controlling, and finish it up, closing. The PMP exam will test your understanding that these are universal. What does change is the frequency and overlap of these actions. In a predictive project, you might have one big planning phase at the start. In an adaptive project, you are planning and executing every single day in small loops. You are closing small increments of work every 2 weeks. The work doesn't disappear, it just changes shape. So, on the exam, if a question asks if an Agile project needs a closing process, the answer is a resounding yes. Every project needs a formal finish. Now, let's see how all these theories look in the real world. To really cement these concepts, let's look at two contrasting real-world scenarios. This is exactly how the PMP exam will present problems to you. Scenario A is a government infrastructure project, like building a new bridge. Here, we have high safety requirements. People's lives are literally on the line. We have rigid regulatory compliance and a strict functional hierarchy within the government agency. The result? A predictive approach. You cannot iterate on a bridge's foundation once the concrete is poured. Extensive upfront planning is mandated to prevent catastrophic physical failure. In this world, measure twice, cut once is the law. Now, look at Scenario B, a tech startup app. This project is defined by high technical innovation and financing uncertainty. The team's survival depends on rapid user feedback to find a product-market fit. The result here is an adaptive approach. By using iterative delivery, the team manages financial risk. They only build what the market actually wants. If the first version fails, they pivot quickly based on real data. When you're answering exam questions, try to map the scenario to one of these two extremes. Is it more like a bridge, where failure is physical and costly, or more like an app, where the biggest risk is building something nobody wants? Identifying this center of gravity will lead you to the right answer. Now, let's formalize the logic we use to make these decisions. When you are faced with a "what should the project manager do next?" question on the exam, use this 3-step logic. It is a systematic way to reach the tailored approach. Step 1 is to assess requirements clarity. Ask yourself, are the requirements known and stable? If the answer is yes, you have a predictive bias. If the answer is no, if they are fuzzy or expected to change, you have an adaptive bias. This is your starting point. Step 2 is to evaluate external risk. This acts as a filter. Even if your requirements are fuzzy, if there are strict safety or regulatory compliance needs, you are often forced into predictive upfront planning for those specific elements. You can't iterate on safety. Step 3 is to check organizational reality. Look at the culture. Is it hierarchical or empowered? Look at the teams. Are they massive distributed networks or small, co-located groups? This determines if the chosen approach can actually be executed. The final synthesis of these 3 steps gives you your output, a tailored approach. This might be purely predictive, purely adaptive, or, most commonly in the real world, a hybrid of the two. This systematic diagnosis is the core of the PMP mindset. But be careful, there are several traps designed to lead you astray. As you prepare for the exam, you need to watch out for 3 specific traps that PMI loves to set. These represent the most common mistakes made by project managers in the field. Trap 1 is forcing predictability. This happens when a manager tries to choose a rigid, predictive approach in an environment defined by extreme technological uncertainty. If you see words like innovation, cutting edge, or uncertainty, and the answer choice suggests a detailed 2-year plan, it's a trap. You cannot plan away true uncertainty. You must adapt to it. Trap 2 is ignoring the customer. This occurs when a manager fails to select an iterative approach even though the deliverables' core value relies almost entirely on continuous end-user feedback. If the scenario says the customer isn't quite sure what they want, your answer must involve getting them a prototype or an increment as soon as possible. Trap 3 is fighting the culture. This is a subtle one. It's the mistake of attempting to force a pure, agile framework onto a rigidly traditional command and control organization without any tailoring. The PMP exam wants to see that you are a pragmatic leader. Sometimes, the right answer isn't the purest agile method, but a hybrid one that respects the organization's current maturity level. Avoid these traps, and you'll be well on your way to success. Now let's talk about that hybrid middle ground in more detail. In the real world, The lines between predictive and adaptive are rarely as clean as they are in a textbook. This brings us to the hybrid reality. Most complex projects today are actually a blend of multiple approaches utilized within the exact same project. Consider the example on the slide. An adaptive approach is used to navigate the uncertainty of software development, where requirements change daily. But this entire process is embedded within a predictive approach for the physical hardware rollout. You might be agile in how you code the app, but predictive in how you ship the physical servers to data centers across the country. You can't iterate on a shipping container once it's in the middle of the ocean. This matters because as a project manager, you must be comfortable managing these different speeds. You might have an agile team doing 2-week sprints, reporting into a larger program that uses monthly milestones and a traditional Gantt chart. This blending isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of a mature, situational approach to management. Don't be afraid of the middle ground. It's where most successful projects actually live. Let's wrap up with our key takeaways. We've covered a lot of ground today, so let's distill it down to the essentials you need to carry forward. First and foremost, context is king. There is no one-size-fits-all. Your choice of development approach must be a reflection of your deliverables, your project environment, and your organizational culture. If you ignore any one of these three, your project is at risk. Second, cadence is flexible. Whether you deliver once at the end, periodically, or continuously, the decision should be driven entirely by one question: when is business value needed? Don't let a framework dictate your timing. Let the business needs dictate your framework. Finally, remember the PMP mindset. The exam isn't interested in your ability to memorize definitions. It is testing your situational awareness. It wants to see that you can systematically diagnose an environment before you decide on the framework. Before you act, analyze the requirements, the risks, and the reality of the organization.
If you can do that, you won't just pass an exam. You will be the kind of project manager who can lead any team to success, no matter how complex the challenge. Good luck with your studies.